This is a topic that a lot of new homeschooling families don't hear too much about. And that problem is that we veteran homeschoolers don't think that you need to know about it. We figure you'll figure it out on your own. Veteran homeschoolers will tell you homeschooling is easy. Don't worry about giving grades or testing. You don't have to use textbooks. You can make up your own curriculum. You don't have to follow state diploma requirements. All of this is true. But somewhere down the line, your student is going to need a record of his quarterly, semester, or yearly progress. What subjects has he studied this year? What grades did she make when she studied that subject? If he has a high school diploma, what subjects did he take? And what grades did she make when she took those subjects? Where are you going to need records? There's the question. You may not think you will, but you will. If before they graduate from high school, you transfer them back to a public school, a private school, or a church school. Later on, they may go to the military. You may have employers who want to see their records. Unfortunately, you may find yourself in a court case, either truancy or child custody or educational neglect. There may be a point where we need to document the need for adult services and benefits, like vocational rehabilitation, Medicaid, Social Security. So those are places you may need records. Then what do you keep once you have the records? Be aware that when you're moving in life, as your children move into adult life, as you experience life changes, you may move, you may divorce, you may have a fire in your home, you may have any other natural disaster. Records can be lost. So that's why you need to keep an original copy of the transcript, an original copy of the diploma, and a copy of both of those documents somewhere else, either digital or physical. So one of the things you're going to want to keep is a completed copy of the transcript. This is after you graduate. Make it, put a graduation date on it. And at the very least, you should complete a yearly form documenting subjects studied during that year and giving your student a grade for those subjects. If you're in a church school that requires records, then they'll give you a format to use. But if you're using private school law for legal compliance, then you need to come up with your own format for end of the year reporting form. So that's the first thing you need to do to have a transcript is a yearly progress report. Then the other thing you need to keep is a diploma. At the end of your student's education, you will probably give him a diploma. If you're in a church school and meet their graduation requirements, then they're going to issue your diploma. But if you're using the private school law, then you will be the one that issues that diploma. Some homeschooling parents have chosen to give their child a GED and let the state document the end of their student's education. But those are your options as you have, is creating your own diploma or letting the church school to create your diploma. The other thing to keep, besides a transcript, besides a copy of the diploma, is a copy of the original enrollment document. And what in the world is an original enrollment document? You're asking. I know you are. And the reason I mention this is because now, as homeschooling students are moving into adulthood, we find employers asking if they were legally homeschooling in their state when they graduated. Who knew they were ever going to ask that question? But that has come up. And so your original enrollment document will be one of two things. In Alabama, we only can use the church school law or the private school law to legally comply. So if you were a part of a church school, then you filled out a church school enrollment form at the time you enrolled in that church school. Get a copy of it when you enroll, before you graduate, and if you can't find it, hopefully you won't worry about it. But if you're moving into homeschooling right now, get and keep a copy of your church school enrollment form. The original of that has to go to the Board of Education, so make sure you have a copy of it. The other original enrollment document, which I'm talking about, is the private school enrollment form. And what's been interesting about that is people have been confused about what they call that. I'm not sure, there's not a consistent name for that from school district to school district. I'm not sure why that is, but as you know, as of 2021, it's still inconsistent. You may find it being called an intent to homeschool. It could be called a homeschool enrollment form. It could be called a private school enrollment form. But what you need to do is at least report your enrollment of your children in your local school district if you're using the private school law. So if your school district does not provide this document for you, then you need to create that document. Simply a letter stating that you intend to use the private school law to teach your children at home. You need to list their names, their birth dates, and sign and date it. And I would send it certified mail to your local Board of Education so that you will get a return receipt that they received it at the Board of Education. And keep those. Keep copies. Keep copies. The next thing I'm going to talk about is lesson plans, which sounds very teacherish. But lesson plans are the legal document that education has occurred. If you ever had to go to court to back up your home education, the judge would want to see your lesson plans. Fortunately, I've never done that. In 30 years being involved in homeschooling, I've never had to do that. But that is still the truth, if that ever had to happen to you. So most of us will never be in a court case where we would have to prove our homeschooling. But remember those things I talked about finding yourself in court, like for truancy or educational neglect or a divorce case? Just keep that in mind. So lesson plans are the legal document that education has occurred. But this is why I think you need to keep lesson plans. They're going to make your life easier on a daily or weekly basis, okay? So I'm going to confess right now, my first year I homeschooled, I didn't do lesson plans. Yes, I didn't. All those years ago, I didn't do lesson plans. I would wake up on a Monday morning and I would have 3 sets of bright eyes facing me, staring me in the face, and I would have no real idea what I was going to do that day. So that was the only year I did that. After that first year, I realized something had to change. So I started doing lesson plans every Friday at least for the next week, maybe the next 2 weeks. Now, I've known people who've done lesson plans for the entire year, but that was not my experience. So just want to, make that clear. But when I did my lesson plans, not only would I do the academics, but I would make sure I added any music lessons we had, any sports practice we might have, any field trips, any other extracurricular activities that we had going on outside the home. Those were on my lesson plans. Because if you had to be somewhere at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you don't want to put too many things on your lesson plans to get done that day. And, you just need to plan your life around it. You don't need to kill yourself doing academics. Plan your academics around the rest of life that's happening. So in the summer, after I received the textbooks that I was going to be using that year, I would divide them into a fourth or half and a fourth so that I would have an idea of how much I needed to do to get through with the textbook that year. I also used unit studies back then, so I didn't use textbooks for everything. So I would have to look and see, what is it we need to get done for these unit studies? What do I want to accomplish? How long will that take? And so those unit studies were factored into my lesson plans as well. So like I said, I only did it for maybe 1 or 2 weeks at a time, because if you didn't get through with everything, then you could adjust your lesson plans for the next week or two. And you'll hear people say, don't be a slave to your textbooks. Well, I didn't feel I was a slave to my textbooks. The textbooks were a tool that I used to accomplish my educational objectives that I had for my children. But I needed to have a plan. I wanted to accomplish it. Not, did I finish a textbook every year? No, I didn't. Did I finish everything I wanted to do for my unit studies? Maybe not. But I was working pretty hard to get it done. And if I wanted to get it done, if we were healthy, if everything stayed the same, then we could get things done. My school year was 170 days. Your church school may set it for you, and you may set it for yourself. So that was how many days I gave myself to get finished with my academics for the year. So the next thing I did, I told you about lesson plans. The next thing I did is I gave my children quarterly evaluations. Now you could call them, if they were in public school, they'd be called report cards. But I just said quarterly evaluations, where I listed the subjects they did. I listed some highlights of what we might have studied during that quarter, and then I gave them a grade. I also, as part of these quarterly reports, gave them, I listed all the extracurricular activities we did. I listed all the books they read. Why? just to have a record of what we had done that quarter. Because believe me, by the end of the year, you're going to have forgotten what you've done. You might choose to use a semester evaluation period if you want to. I just chose to use quarterly for me, and documented the things we did so that I had a record. And then at the end of the year, I took those quarterly evaluations, I averaged them up, and I gave an end of the year report. So, and for every subject, and I didn't have to be as detailed on that because I had them on the quarterly reports in terms of what we did. And then those are the end of the year reports that I used to create a transcript for my students. I had 3 students that I graduated, and all of them had a transcript. So, yes, they did need it. One of them joined the military. All 3 of them went to college, graduate school, employers. All of them used their high school transcript. So, other people besides me did see that high school transcript. The last thing I want to say to you is don't be overwhelmed by all this record keeping. I know if you've never thought about it and you're new to homeschooling, this may sound overwhelming, but just remember, I didn't know anything about it either. Most people don't. So if we can learn, you can learn too. The important thing for younger students, I would say grade 6 and below, is keep the grading system as simple as you can. There's like 3 ways you could do it. You could use E, G, I, and N. E for excellent, G for good, I for improving, N for needs improvement. That's a simple way to do it. And you can it would be a subjective evaluation. Another one would be S and U for satisfactory or unsatisfactory, which is even simpler, I guess, than the other one. But you could just give them letter grades, A, B, C, D, and E or F. I hope they don't fail, but some people use it for motivation. Anyway, but if you choose a grading system, make sure you be consistent with that grading system throughout the year. If you start with S's and U's, stay with S's and U's the entire year. Or if you want to change over in mid-year, go back and change the first grading system for that. You just don't want, you want to make sure that you're consistent with the grading system throughout the year. And then for students in grades 7 and above, I recommend that you use number grades. Why? Because most public high schools in Alabama use number grades in high school. And I hear you saying, we don't have to do them the way public high schools do. That's true, you don't. However, if your child goes into college, their transcript is going to be held by a college admissions officer, and they're going to be comparing them to a public school or a private school student. So your transcript ought to be easily compared, just so that if they're comparing apples to apples, they're not saying, this looks like oranges to me, and I'm comparing it to these apples over here. The reason I say it's my recommendation is it just makes it easier for things in the future. I remember one mom who wanted to use a grading scale for her high schoolers. For 93 to 100 was an A, and 85 to 92 was a B, and so on down the line. And when it came time for her daughter to graduate, I called her before I did her GPA, and I said, now listen, your daughter is going to college with students who are on the 90 to 100 grading scale. So her A's are going to be different from the A's that you gave somebody else. Somebody else is giving their student. Do you want that still when I calculate the GPA? And when I put it to her that way, she said, no, I don't. So these are just things you have to think about. You can do, really, you have a lot of freedom to do your homeschooling any way you want to, but you have to think of what is the end result of it. So, and why I say 7th and 8th grade, because some people take high school level courses in 7th and 8th grade. So those courses would count towards your high school diploma. So it's true that we don't have to do the same things as public schools. So, and that's simply my recommendation, is that for grades 7 and above, you do number grades. And, so it's going to be a little more serious. You're going to start giving high school credit because you're going to be giving a diploma. There's a lot more to say about that, but I'm also on this website, there's also a how to homeschool through high school seminar, and that would probably speak more to that. So for homeschooling parents, teaching your children is your job, okay? And treat it as such. If your weekly schedule is busy, then you might have to eliminate some of that busyness out of your life so that you can accomplish your schoolwork. Dismiss or minimize the distractions that you have. For me, I kept a daily schedule. Like, we got up at a certain time, they had chores to do beforehand, we started school at a certain time, and I made sure that my phone, my email, my social media was pretty well turned off at that time. Because your children need to know that their education is your priority. And when they see you treating it as your priority, then they will in turn treat their education as their priority. So thanks for listening today to this brief thing, I hope, on record keeping, why it's important for homeschoolers. Have any questions, make sure you contact us by email or phone. The information is elsewhere on this Homeschool Alabama website. Thank you for joining today.